are really relevant to U.S. foreign policy, and it's whether or not using drones is a good tactic. And I'm going to argue that for a number of reasons, this is a terrible idea and actually has a lot of adverse effects that makes the United States jobs overseas more difficult. So, first of all, we think that the use of drones actually creates a lot of the anti-Americanism and sort of anti-American violence that we're trying to avoid. So, for example, a lot of times drones are used to target sort of Taliban or Al-Qaeda militants in parts of Afghanistan or Pakistan. Great. So, sometimes you're successful in hitting them, but a lot of times, because you're killing people in the places that they live, there's a lot of collateral damage, like killing children, wives, relatives, hitting the wrong place, not having accurate information. And so we think that when this happens, you have villages that may not necessarily care that much about the United States, but then all of a sudden feel this anti-American sentiment. And those people who've lost relatives or have seen random violence enacted on their villages are more likely to pick up arms against the United States, and sort of we create the very problem that we're trying to avoid. But we also think that drones have a lack of responsibility because they sort of exist in this sort of legal shaky ground. We're not really sure if they're legal or not. We're not really sure if the U.S. has the sovereignty to launch drones. And so you have a lot of issues of like Pakistan getting mad at the United States and fraying a lot of important tensions and a lot of important allies and sort of relationships that the U.S. has with other countries. But finally, we think that drones create this sort of sense of sort of not being responsible because you're able to shoot them from miles away, and so you have no connection to the actual lives that are being lost.
So I think the problem here is more one of general American foreign policy and more general counterterrorism policy than it is with drones per se. Because I think that drones can actually help us pursue an active foreign policy against terrorists, which also helps minimize collateral damage. Why is this true? Because, first of all, drones can help us gather intelligence. So you have things like predator drones, which can circle a village for days or even weeks, just gathering intelligence, watching militants go back and forth, identifying in which hut a militant lives, in which hut kids live. And once you know which huts to target, then you can call in something like a hunter-killer drone. The Reaper is what we have right now. The Reaper has very precisely targeted Hellfire missiles of the type which can destroy just a hut, but only that hut and not the rest of the village. If you compare that to the other tools in our arsenal, that's actually a lot more effective, with a lot less collateral damage than the other things we might do. So for example, in Yemen, we use drones, but we've also used sub-launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. Now cruise missiles are really, really big, and they have a massive blast radius. So when you send a Tomahawk down into a village, that entire village is being leveled. If you compare this to a drone, with a drone you can eliminate one hut or a cluster of huts.
The thing that Rashad doesn't really acknowledge here is he talks about how this is better targeted policy, and yes, maybe you can have something circle a village and sort of gather intelligence. So I would say it's pretty difficult to always know what's going on, especially because they're doing this at night. So even if you have good intelligence, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have collateral damage. In fact, we've seen that this has happened in a lot of parts of sort of South Asia right now, is that we just don't have the kind of intelligence that the United States needs to actually have these targeted strikes. And even if, say, only 1 in 10 drone strike doesn't work, the fact that that one doesn't work and creates the kind of feelings that lead to terrorism is sort of problematic in and of itself. But he also never addresses the two other points I brought up, which is that it exists in this legal shaky ground and phrased relationships. We're seeing that the United States has a really sort of contentious relationship with Pakistan right now because of drone strikes and because of attacks on Pakistani soldiers that the U.S. refuses to apologize for. We say that because drones have such a liability, we shouldn't be using them because they're creating the kind of collateral damage that Rashad insists that we could sort of avoid and never have. But moreover, he never addresses the fact that drones are literally like playing a video game. You have someone sitting in like Arizona or New Mexico calling in drone strikes, people who've never been there, who've never met the people on the ground, and who really have no conception of the kind of human life that's being lost. I think this is really problematic because it literally trivializes war to the point where you don't feel like you're killing another person, and that the United States could just kill people because they don't feel like it's problematic and never really have to deal with the moral side of their decisions.
So, I think it's actually a really good thing that we can protect our soldiers from the horrors of war. Right? So, if you look at soldiers, they're afflicted by things like PTSD, not just because they themselves were in, like, traumatic situations where their own life was at risk, but because of the realities of war, because of, the horror of killing someone, of taking a human life. And I think if we can abstract that, if we can keep them in Nevada in a trailer somewhere, where they can still go back to their family at the end of the day. If we can fight our wars and protect American security while keeping our servicemen safe and comfortable, I think that's a good thing. But also, on the legal point of view, I think it's kind of funny to bring up the legalism of fighting terror when this is essentially an undeclared war where no matter how we prosecute it, we're sending in troops. We're invading countries. None of that is legal. I think that at the point where you can minimize at least American casualties and still minimize collateral damage, you can't eliminate it. You can never eliminate collateral damage. But if you look at a Reaper versus an F-15 or a Predator versus a Tomahawk missile, I think you can say that drones actually produce less collateral damage than the alternative. This is a comparative debate. You have to compare the two possible worlds, and I think the world with drones is a better one.